Today, we have a story that will send a chill down your spine. Imagine this. At your birthday party, your 12-year-old granddaughter leans in and whispers, "Grandma, don't eat the cake." And that whisper uncovers a diabolical plot by your own mother and sister to poison you, all so they could steal your cruise vacation. It's just unbelievable, isn't it? We would love to know from what corners of the world you're tuning in to listen to this intense story. Please let us know what city you're watching from in the comments below. Before we get started, I want to give a very special shout out to some of my most active and loyal subscribers, Cynthia, Elizabeth, and Pamela. Ladies, thank you so much for all your support. I read every single one of your comments. Thank you for being with me. And now, make yourselves comfortable. My name is Eleanor, and at 62 years of age, I have come to understand that family is not a simple proposition. It can be the bedrock on which you build your life or the grinding stone that wears you down to dust. For most of my life, I have tried to pretend mine was only the former. This past Saturday, on what should have been a day of simple, quiet celebration, the pretense finally, irrevocably, shattered. The day began beautifully. It was a perfect late summer afternoon in our quiet suburb just outside of Chicago, the kind of day that holds the warmth of the sun in its golden hands and refuses to let go. The air drifting through the open windows of my house carried the sweet, heady scent of my neighbor's late-blooming roses and the clean green smell of freshly cut grass. My home, the one my late husband Charles and I had filled with a lifetime of love and laughter, felt peaceful. Photos on the mantelpiece chronicled our journey. A black and white photo from our wedding day, a faded picture of our son, Michael, on his first day of school, and a dozen snapshots of our granddaughter, Simone, her face changing from a chubby-cheeked infant to the bright, fiercely intelligent 12-year-old she was today. She was the undisputed joy of my life, a second chance at the magic of childhood. That afternoon, she was my co-hostess, her movements quick and efficient as she helped me set out the good china and polish the silver. She had a seriousness about her that was both charming and slightly unnerving in one so young, an old soul's gravity that seemed to anchor her youthful energy. "Grandma," she said, carefully lining up the forks, "do you think Aunt Darlene will complain about the chicken being too dry, even though it isn't?" The question was so direct, so perceptive, it made me smile. She saw the patterns, the predictable currents of our family's dysfunction, with a clarity that most adults, including her own father, often missed. "Probably, baby," I said, smoothing her hair, "but we're not going to let it bother us today, are we?" The guests of honor, my mother and my sister, arrived precisely on time. Mama Rose, my mother, was a force of nature even at 84. She swept into the house with a theatrical flourish, a wide, beaming smile on her face, and a large, domed cake carrier held in her hands like a trophy. "Happy birthday to my firstborn," she declared, her voice booming. She was a woman who thrived on being the center of any gathering, the benevolent, smiling matriarch whose cheerfulness was both a comfort and a command. Behind her, trailing in her wake like a sullen shadow, was my sister Darlene. Darlene was 2 years my junior, but she carried herself with the weary, put-upon air of someone who had endured 1,000 more hardships. Her smile was a tight, fleeting thing that never quite reached her eyes. She looked around my comfortable, sunlit living room, her gaze lingering on the new rug, the polished floors, the vase of fresh flowers on the coffee table. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice a master class in the backhanded compliment. "Everything is always so perfect here." It must be so nice not to have to worry about a thing in the world. The familiar dance began. The superficial pleasantries, the carefully navigated conversation that skirted the edges of old grievances like a ship avoiding a rocky coastline. Darlene spoke at length about her latest financial woes, the car needing new brakes, the rising cost of groceries. Mama Rose would listen with a pained, sympathetic expression before turning her bright, expectant gaze on me, a silent, powerful transmission of maternal expectation. For 60 years, this had been the dynamic. Darlene had the problems, and I, the stable, responsible older sister, was expected to provide the solutions. But this year, something had shifted. The unspoken tension in the room was a direct result of a single word I had spoken a month prior, a word I had almost never used with them before. No. It was a small word, but it had detonated like a bomb in the heart of our family, and we were all still living with the fallout. Finally, after the small talk had been exhausted, it was time for the main event. Mama Rose went to the kitchen and returned with a look of immense pride on her face. In her hands was the cake, now freed from its carrier and adorned with a halo of 62 flickering candles. It was a beautiful lemon bundt cake, my absolute favorite, the one she had been making for my birthday since I was a little girl. Its familiar, citrusy scent filled the room, a smell I had always associated with love and home. Today, it smelled like a lie. She placed it on the table in front of me, the candlelight dancing in her eyes. "Make a wish, my darling," she said, her smile wider and brighter than ever. The room felt charged, expectant. My husband Charles had his camera ready. Darlene was watching me with a strange, unreadable intensity. And beside me, my granddaughter Simone was as still and silent as a statue. The 62 flames danced before me, a tiny glittering constellation of my years on this earth. The familiar, slightly off-key tune of "Happy Birthday" filled the room, a sound that should have been comforting, but instead felt like a performance. A thin veneer of joy stretched taut over a deep well of unspoken resentments. I smiled, a carefully constructed expression of grandmotherly delight for my husband and his ever-present camera. But my eyes were on my mother and sister. They were singing the loudest, their faces bright with a manufactured enthusiasm that felt deeply, chillingly false. They were watching me with a strange, predatory intensity, as if my reaction to this simple, confectionery offering was a matter of extreme importance. A small, cold knot of anxiety, a feeling I had lived with my entire life in their presence, tightened in my gut. I was leaning forward, taking the deep breath required to extinguish the small galaxy of candles, when I felt a small, urgent tug on my sleeve. It was Simone. She leaned in close, her braids brushing against my arm, her face hidden from the rest of the room. I expected her to whisper a last-minute birthday wish in my ear, a sweet, childish secret. Instead, her warm breath against my skin carried a message of chilling gravity. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice low and tight with an adult seriousness that did not belong to a 12-year-old. "Don't eat the cake." The words were a bucket of ice water thrown on the warm, flickering scene. For a single frozen moment, the world seemed to stop. The sound of the singing faded into a distant buzz. All I could hear was the frantic, sudden hammering of my own heart. I stared into the candle flames, my mind racing. Simone was not a fanciful child given to dramatic pronouncements. She was a reader, a thinker, a quiet observer who saw more than most adults. If she was saying this, she had a reason, a powerful one. My mind flashed with a dozen terrible possibilities, each one more absurd than the last. But one thing was certain. I trusted the gut instinct of the child beside me more than I trusted the smiling faces of the women who had raised me. My reaction was instantaneous and, I hoped, invisible. I gave her hand a tiny, imperceptible squeeze under the table, a secret signal of acknowledgement that passed between us. Then, without missing a beat, I took that deep breath and blew. The 62 flames vanished in a puff of smoke. The room erupted in applause. Speech! Speech! My husband, Charles, cheered, lowering his camera. Oh, no speeches, I laughed, the sound feeling foreign and brittle in my own ears. Just cake. Mama Rose beamed, picking up the silver cake knife, its serrated edge gleaming under the dining room lights. As she plunged it into the soft yellow cake, and as Charles began to pass around the floral china plates, I saw my opening. I rose from my chair, pressing a hand to my stomach. You know, all this excitement, I announced to the room with a light apologetic laugh. I think I just need to freshen up for a moment. Don't wait for me to start. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was the best I could do. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter on my way out, a casual modern motion that I prayed no one would question. The short walk to the guest bathroom felt like a mile. Each step was a battle to maintain a mask of normalcy while a storm of fear and confusion raged inside me. I locked the bathroom door behind me. The click of the deadbolt, a small, satisfying sound of security. I leaned against the cool, smooth wood, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. A 62-year-old woman with a forced smile still lingering on her lips, but with sheer, unadulterated panic in her eyes. What was going on? My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I pulled up Simone's contact. I couldn't risk calling her and having my sister or mother overhear her end of the conversation, but Simone and I had a system, a secret line of communication we'd developed for those times when she was at a sleepover and needed to be rescued without alerting her friends. I pressed the call button, let it ring just once, and then immediately hung up. It was our signal. Call me back or text me. It's an emergency. I stared at the phone's blank screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The silence in the small bathroom was absolute. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation from the dining room, a world away. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 30 seconds before my phone vibrated in my hand. A text message from Simone. I took another shaky breath and opened it. The message was written in the clipped, urgent shorthand of a child trying to relay a world-shattering piece of intelligence before being discovered. Heard Mama Rose and Aunt Darlene talking in the kitchen when they thought I was outside. Mama Rose said she was glad she added the secret ingredient. Darlene asked if she was sure the cake would work. Mama Rose said yes, and that by tomorrow morning, none of us would be in any shape to get on the cruise ship. Grandma, I think they poisoned us. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the words, I think they poisoned us, seeming to burn themselves directly onto my brain. The floral wallpaper of the bathroom, the gentle hum of the ventilation fan, the muffled sounds of my own birthday party. It all faded into a distant, irrelevant background noise. The world had shrunk to the size of that horrifying text message. For a single vertiginous moment, a wave of pure, unadulterated disbelief washed over me. My mother? Poison my birthday cake? It was the stuff of Gothic novels, of lurid television dramas. It was not something that happened in a quiet, respectable suburb of Chicago to a 62-year-old woman, but the disbelief was quickly extinguished by a cold, terrible wave of understanding. Because this wasn't a sudden, inexplicable act of madness. It was the logical, if monstrous, conclusion to a story that had been writing itself for my entire life. As I stood there, leaning against the cool bathroom door, my mind flew back 1 month to the Sunday afternoon conversation in my living room that had lit the fuse for this unthinkable act of betrayal. It was the day I had finally, after a lifetime of weary acquiescence, said no. They had come over for dinner, as they did every other Sunday. The atmosphere was deceptively pleasant. Darlene was showing me pictures on her phone of her daughter's latest dance recital, and Mama Rose was telling a long, rambling story about a neighbor. We spoke of everything and nothing, carefully navigating the placid surface of our relationship, all of us pretending not to be aware of the dangerous currents that churned beneath. The topic of the cruise was introduced by Darlene with a practiced, casual air, as if it were a foregone conclusion. "I was just looking at the cruise line's website this morning," she'd said, a dreamy look in her eye. "They have a snorkeling excursion in St. Martin that Brianna would just die for. And the shopping in St. Thomas, can you even imagine?" Mama Rose, ever the master of the manipulative pivot, saw her opening. "Oh, it is just so wonderful that you're able to take them, Eleanor," she said, turning her bright, beaming smile on me. "Family is the most important thing in the world, after all. And poor Darlene has had such a terribly difficult year. She deserves a little sunshine." There it was, the ambush, perfectly executed, that I'd been dreading for weeks. They didn't ask. They never asked. They simply stated their desires as if they were my obligations, framing my expected generosity as a fundamental law of our family's physics. For decades, I had abided by this law. I was the responsible one, the one with the successful husband and the comfortable life. Darlene was the struggling one, the one with the endless string of bad luck and worse decisions. And Mama Rose was the matriarchal judge who ensured that my resources were perpetually redistributed to soothe Darlene's latest crisis. "Of course," Darlene added with a perfectly pitched martyred sigh, "we could never afford something like that on our own." "But you've always been so good to us, Eleanor. You've always understood." I looked at their faces, so full of a smiling, absolute certainty, and something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, angry break, but a quiet, seismic shift in my own soul. I thought of Charles, of the years he had worked, of the careful plans we had made for our retirement. This cruise wasn't just a vacation. It was the culmination of a lifetime of shared dreams, a promise we had made to ourselves. And I saw, with a sudden and devastating clarity, that my family's sense of entitlement had no limits. They would happily drain my resources, my energy, and my own dreams, and they would do it with a smile, convinced it was their due. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Darlene, Mama," I began, my voice calm and even, giving no hint of the revolution that was taking place inside me. "I love you both. You know that. But Charles and I have saved for this trip for a very long time. It's a special celebration for us. I have budgeted for the 4 of us. For me, Charles, Michael, and Simone. I simply cannot afford to pay for 5 extra people. I am so sorry, but the answer is no." The word no fell into the comfortable, expectant silence of my living room like a stone. The smiles on their faces vanished, replaced by looks of stunned, uncomprehending disbelief. Darlene was the first to recover, her disbelief quickly curdling into a familiar wounded rage. "No," she repeated, her voice rising. "What do you mean, no? After everything we've been through, after all the support I've given you over the years?" The sheer audacity of her rewriting of our history was almost impressive. "It's nothing to you, Eleanor. A drop in the bucket. You just sit here in your perfect house with your perfect life and you can't stand to see me have one nice thing. You're selfish. You've always been selfish." Then came Mama Rose. Her weapon of choice not anger, but a thick, suffocating blanket of emotional blackmail. Her eyes filled with tears. "Eleanor, I am shocked at you," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "Darlene is your sister, your only sister. Family is supposed to help family. What would your dear father say if he could hear you now? You are breaking your mother's heart." They were a perfect practice team, the angry cop and the sad cop, and for my entire life, their tactics had worked. But not this time. I stood my ground. "My heart is breaking too, Mama," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's breaking because you are asking me to choose between my sister's wants and my own family's needs. And I am finally choosing my own family. The answer is still no." The cold, furious silence that followed was the end of the conversation, and I see now the beginning of their monstrous, petty plot. They had left my house that day without another word, and now, a month later, I was standing in my bathroom, staring at a text message, finally understanding the true depths of their entitled rage. The sterile white walls of the guest bathroom seemed to press in on me, the air thick and hard to breathe. I gripped the cool porcelain of the sink, my knuckles white, and stared at my own reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, her face pale with shock, her eyes wide with a terrible new knowledge. The text message on my phone was a venomous snake, coiled and waiting, its poison already seeping into my reality, poisoned us. The words were absurd, melodramatic, and yet, in the context of my family, they held the horrifying ring of truth. My mind, with a vivid and sickening clarity, began to reconstruct the scene as Simone must have witnessed it. I could see it all as if I had been there myself, a ghost in the corner of my own kitchen. The party would have been in full swing in the living and dining rooms, the sound of polite chatter and my husband's laughter a distant, cheerful murmur. Simone, having likely slipped away from the adults to get a glass of juice or to check on her tablet, would have approached the kitchen, her footsteps silent. She was a quiet child, observant and unobtrusive, a quality that my mother and sister had clearly, foolishly forgotten. She would have stopped at the doorway, her progress halted by the sound of their hushed conspiratorial whispers. Mama Rose and Darlene would have been standing by the counter, their backs to the door, admiring the beautiful lemon bundt cake that now sat on my dining room table like a ticking time bomb. I could almost hear Darlene's voice, a reedy whisper laced with a familiar nervous anxiety. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Mama? What if we make them too sick? What if Eleanor has to go to the hospital?" A flicker of fear, not of conscience, but of consequences. And then my mother's voice, so full of a cheerful, folksy confidence that it was 1,000 times more chilling. "Now don't you be a coward, Darlene. It's not poison, for heaven's sake. Don't be so dramatic. It's just a little something from my herb garden. My own grandmother used to use a tincture of it when the children were constipated. A powerful, all-natural laxative, that's all. They'll have terrible stomach cramps, a bit of a fever maybe. They'll think it's a 24-hour stomach flu. They'll be in no condition to get on a plane, let alone a cruise ship, for at least 2 days. It is absolutely foolproof. I could picture her then, taking a small, unlabeled vial from her purse and carefully, precisely drizzling its contents into the thick, sugary lemon glaze she was whisking in a bowl. A secret ingredient passed down through generations, now weaponized for the pettiest of motives. "And you put enough in?" Darlene's voice, a mixture of greed and trepidation. "I was generous with it," Mama Rose would have replied, a self-satisfied smile in her voice as she spread the tainted glaze over the warm cake. "The strong citrus flavor will mask any bitterness. They will never taste a thing. Trust me, Darlene, it will work perfectly." The motive, which had been a simmering, unspoken thing for a month, would have then been laid bare. "She deserves it," Darlene would have spat, her voice thick with resentment. "After that, no. After all I've done for this family, for her to be so selfish, acting like she's better than us with her big house and her fancy trips." "She is your sister," Mama Rose would have said, not in correction, but in confirmation. "She has a duty. And you, my darling, have had a very hard year. You deserve a vacation. This is just a way of helping Eleanor remember her obligations to her family." I could see my daughter Simone standing in the shadows of the hallway, a small silent witness to this casual domestic evil. I could feel her world tilting on its axis, the two women who were supposed to be pillars of love and safety in her life, revealing themselves to be cruel, petty conspirators. I could feel her terror, her disbelief, and then the slow, rising tide of a fierce, protective anger on behalf of her grandmother. She would have backed away slowly, her heart pounding, her mind racing, knowing she had to warn me but not knowing how. She was just a child, and they were the adults, the matriarchs. And so she waited, watching them, her young mind formulating the plan that had led to the whisper in my ear and the text message in my hand. The imagined scene faded, leaving me back in the sterile silence of the bathroom, gripping the sink. The horror was now complete, the picture filled in with the ugly colors of their motive and their method. But beneath the horror, a new feeling was taking root, a profound, overwhelming sense of pride in my granddaughter. In a moment of crisis, she had not panicked. She had been brave, clever, and loyal. She was a warrior, and she had just handed me my sword and shield. My own fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness for the last time. They had mistaken my generosity for an obligation. And now they had tried to physically harm my family, my grandchild in my own home. The time for being the quiet, accommodating, peacekeeping daughter and sister was over. I looked at the stranger in the mirror one last time, and I saw not a victim, but a woman who was about to go to war. I had to go back out there. I had to face them, and I had to protect my husband and the brave little girl who had just saved us all. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it a welcome, grounding sensation. I took one last look at my reflection in the mirror. The panic was gone, replaced by a chilling, unfamiliar calm. The woman who had entered this bathroom was a victim. The woman who was about to walk out was an executioner. I smoothed the front of my dress, unlocked the door, and walked back into the heart of the battle, my own birthday party. The scene I returned to was one of cheerful domestic treachery. The magnificent lemon bundt cake was now sliced, its pristine form violated. My husband, Charles, bless his trusting heart, had a generous slice on the plate in front of him, his fork poised for the first bite. Simone was frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea fixed on me. And across the table, my mother and sister were watching the scene with the barely concealed raptor-like intensity of predators waiting for their trap to spring. They were so close to their petty, vicious victory. Time seemed to slow down. I saw Charles lift the fork, a small piece of the tainted cake balanced on its tines. I had seconds to act, and I knew that a single wrong move, a scream, an accusation, would give them the chance to deny everything, to paint me as the hysterical, dramatic one. I had to be smarter than them. I walked toward my husband, my movements fluid and unhurried. I placed a light, affectionate hand on his shoulder, my touch causing him to pause just as the fork reached his lips. "Charles, darling," I said, my voice a symphony of warmth and wifely affection. "Before you take a single bite, you have to see the birthday card Simone made for me. I just found it in my purse. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." It was a complete lie, of course, but it was confusing enough to work. Charles, a man who adored his granddaughter, lowered his fork immediately, his interest piqued. "Oh, let's see it." This small act of misdirection bought me a crucial minute. I turned my attention to the table, to the cake that was the centerpiece of their evil plot. I looked at my mother, my smile radiant. "Mama," I said, my voice full of a daughter's love. "That lemon bundt cake looks absolutely divine. It smells just like the one you made for my 16th birthday. Do you remember that party? The one where I tried to dance with Billy Henderson and tripped over my own feet?" My reminiscing was a carefully chosen tactic, a verbal smokescreen. It forced them to engage, to play along with the nostalgic fantasy. "Oh, I remember," Mama Rose said, her eyes glittering. "You were always so clumsy, dear." "It's my favorite," I continued. "I can't wait to have a slice." "Darlene, you'll have one with me, won't you?" Darlene, caught off guard, stammered for a moment. "Oh, well, you know, Eleanor," she said, placing a hand on her stomach. "I'm watching my figure. All that sugar, I really shouldn't." "And you, Mama?" I asked, turning my bright, innocent gaze on my mother. "You know my blood sugar, darling," she said with a theatrical, sorrowful sigh. "My doctor would have a fit if I touched something so sweet, but you all go ahead. I get my joy just from watching you enjoy it." Their coordinated, flimsy excuses were the final public confirmation I needed. It was a confession, and they didn't even know they were making it. They had built their trap, and now, with their own words, they had stepped directly into the center of it. Throughout this exchange, I kept my eyes on Simone. She was watching me, her young face a mask of awe and understanding. She saw what I was doing. She was my silent partner in this slow, delicate dance of truth and lies. I subtly shifted my position, making sure my back was to my mother and sister, and I gave Simone the signal we had established years ago when she was just a little girl, a tiny, almost imperceptible tap on my earlobe. It was our secret sign, one that meant the coast is clear. It's time to execute the plan. Simone understood immediately. Her childish fear was gone, replaced by a cold adult resolve that was both heartbreaking and magnificent to witness. She carefully placed her napkin on the table and stood up. "Excuse me," she announced, her voice as clear and steady as a bell cutting through the room. "I have to call my dad. I forgot to tell him something really important about my homework." The excuse was so mundane, so perfectly childish, that it was utterly brilliant. Mama Rose and Darlene barely registered it. Their focus still locked on Charles and me, willing us to finally eat the cake. Charles just smiled at his brilliant, responsible granddaughter. No one suspected a thing. Simone walked out of the dining room, her small shoulders squared with a purpose that belied her age. She held her phone in her hand. I knew she wasn't calling her father. She was walking to a quiet room and she was about to dial 3 numbers, 911. Now I just had to hold the fort. I had to keep my family distracted to maintain this fragile illusion of a happy birthday party for just a few more minutes. I turned back to my mother, my smile never wavering. "You know, Mama," I said, my voice dripping with an irony that only I could taste. "You simply must give me the secret family recipe for this lemon glaze. It looks absolutely to die for." The minutes that followed were the longest and most excruciating of my life. I was a performer on the world's most dangerous stage, engaged in a high-wire act of banal conversation, while the fate of my family hung in the balance. Every second felt like an hour. My entire being was focused on one simple, desperate objective: keep Charles from eating that cake. "The secret to the glaze, Mama?" I pressed, my voice a marvel of cheerful, daughterly interest. "Is it the zest of 3 lemons or 4? You always get it so perfectly tangy." Mama rose, her eyes darting nervously between my plate and Charles's, forced a tight smile. "Oh, it's an old family secret, darling. You just have to have the touch." "Just eat the cake, Eleanor," Darlene snapped, her patience wearing thin. "It's going to get dry." The irony of her worrying about a dry cake when she had laced it with a substance to induce a violent illness was not lost on me. Charles, bless his oblivious heart, raised his fork once more. "Well, I'm not waiting," he chuckled. "It looks too good." "Charles, wait," I said, my voice a little too sharp. I softened it with a laugh. "Before you do, could you be a dear and get me a glass of water? All this birthday excitement has left me parched." He sighed, a good-natured, long-suffering husband, and pushed his chair back to head to the kitchen. The small diversion had worked. I caught Simone's eye from across the room. She was sitting on the living room sofa, phone in hand, pretending to play a game. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The call had been made. The clock was ticking. I had to keep them talking. "You know, Darlene," I said, turning my attention to my sister, "this reminds me of the time Mama tried to bake that pineapple upside-down cake for your graduation and forgot the pineapple. Do you remember? We all had to pretend it was a new kind of caramel sponge cake." Darlene just glared at me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The small talk was failing. The tension in the room was becoming a thick, suffocating presence. They knew something was wrong. Their perfect, simple plan was going awry. They had expected tears or immediate illness, not this strange, cheerful filibuster. And then we heard it. A firm, authoritative knock at the front door. It was not the gentle rap of a friendly neighbor. It was a sound that demanded to be answered. Charles, on his way back from the kitchen with my water, looked confused. "Are you expecting someone else, Eleanor?" Mama rose and Darlene exchanged a look of pure, panicked confusion. This was not part of their plan. Before I could answer, Simone shot up from the sofa. "I'll get it," she called out, her voice clear and confident. She walked to the front door, every eye in the room following her. She opened it, and standing on my porch, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, were 2 uniformed police officers. The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. The forced festivity of the party evaporated, replaced by a cold, prickling dread. Charles froze mid-step, the glass of water in his hand. Mama Rose's cheerful matriarch mask dissolved, her face sagging into a mask of pure, slack-jawed shock. Darlene let out a small, strangled gasp. The senior of the 2 officers, a tall man with a calm, serious face, looked past Simone and into the room. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice polite but firm. "We received a 911 call about a possible domestic disturbance. Is everything all right here?" Before any of the stunned adults could find their voice, Simone, my brave, magnificent granddaughter, stepped forward. She was no longer a child. She was a star witness, and she was about to give the performance of a lifetime. She stood up straight, looked the officer directly in the eye, and spoke with a clarity and precision that would have made a prosecuting attorney weep with joy. "My name is Simone Parker," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am 12 years old. I was the one who called. I am not in danger, but I believe a crime may have been committed." The officer's gaze softened with a professional gentleness, but he took her seriously. "Okay, Simone. Can you tell me what's going on?" "Yes, sir," she said. She turned and pointed a small, steady finger directly at my mother and my sister. "Earlier today I was in the hallway and I overheard my great-grandmother Rose and my great-aunt Darlene talking in the kitchen. They said they had put a secret ingredient in my grandmother's birthday cake." She then pointed to the lemon bundt cake sitting on the dining room table. "They said the cake would work and that by tomorrow morning, my grandmother, my grandfather, and I would all be too sick to travel. They were planning to take our places on the cruise ship we are all supposed to be on tomorrow." The accusation, so specific and so calmly delivered, hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. Darlene finally found her voice, a shrill, hysterical shriek. "That's a lie. She's a child. She's making things up. She's always had an overactive imagination, officer." But Simone was unshakable. She did not even look at them. She kept her gaze fixed on the officer. "My great-grandmother said it was a powerful laxative from her garden," Simone continued, her memory photographic. "She said we would have stomach cramps and a fever and that we would be in no condition to travel for at least 2 days. She said my grandmother Eleanor deserved it because she had said no to paying for their trip. The inclusion of the motive, the final damning piece of the puzzle, sealed their fate. The officer looked from my incredibly composed granddaughter to the 2 women who were now sputtering, their faces a ghastly mixture of terror and disbelief. He had been a cop for a long time. He knew the truth when he heard it. Simone's words, so clear, so precise, and so utterly damning, fell into the silent room and detonated. For a moment, no one moved. The image was surreal. 2 uniformed police officers standing in my festively decorated dining room, a half-eaten birthday cake sitting on the table like a piece of condemning evidence, and my family, my entire world, fractured into jagged, irreconcilable pieces. Darlene continued her shrill, panicked denials, her words a useless, fluttering defense against the steel trap of my granddaughter's testimony. "She's lying. She's always been a strange, quiet child, always making up stories. Eleanor has poisoned her mind against us." But the officers were not looking at Darlene. Their calm, professional gaze was fixed on my mother. They knew, as I knew, that Mama Rose was the true center of power, the sun around which my sister's bitter planet had always revolved. The senior officer, a man whose tired eyes had likely seen every possible permutation of human ugliness, addressed her directly, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Ma'am," he said, "is there any truth to what your great-granddaughter is saying?" Mama Rose, cornered and exposed, finally broke. But she did not break into tears of remorse. She broke into a geyser of self-serving, indignant justification. Her cheerful matriarch persona dissolved, revealing the hard, entitled core beneath. "It wasn't poison," she exclaimed, her voice rising with a theatrical, wounded cry. "Good heavens, don't be so dramatic. It was just a little something to give them an upset stomach, that's all. A folk remedy, nothing dangerous." The officer's expression didn't change. "And why?" he asked, his voice dangerously patient. "Would you want to give your family an upset stomach on your daughter's birthday?" It was then that she delivered the line that, more than the act itself, would serve as the epitaph for our relationship. She gestured a trembling, accusatory hand toward me. "Because of her," she cried, her voice thick with a lifetime of perceived injustice. "Darlene has had such a hard, terrible year. She deserved that trip. She deserved a little happiness. And Eleanor, with all her money and her perfect life, refused to help her own sister. It was her duty. We were just helping her remember her obligations to her family." The confession, in its sheer, breathtaking selfishness, was more shocking than the crime itself. She felt no guilt. She felt in her own twisted way that she was the righteous one, a mother merely balancing the scales of cosmic injustice between her two daughters. I looked at my husband, Charles. His face was a mask of pale, horrified disbelief. He had spent 40 years listening to my quiet complaints about my family's dynamic, often dismissing it as simple sibling rivalry. Now, he was finally seeing the profound, unapologetic toxicity for what it was. The police officers were models of professional restraint. One officer took detailed statements from a still fuming Darlene and a self-pitying Mama Rose, while the other approached the dining room table. "With your permission, Mrs. Parker," he said to me, "I'll need to take the cake and the serving utensils as evidence." The act was surreal. He carefully, methodically, placed my favorite lemon bundt cake, my birthday cake, into a large evidence box. The symbol of my mother's love, now officially a piece of evidence in a criminal investigation. They were not arrested that day. The officers explained that a formal report would be filed, and the district attorney's office would decide on the charges, which could range from adulterating food to reckless endangerment. But as my mother and sister were escorted out of my home past the windows of our curious, watching neighbors, their humiliation was a palpable thing. The perfect happy family party had ended in a police matter, the ultimate suburban disgrace. After the police had gone, a profound, heavy silence settled over the house. The three of us, Charles, Simone, and I, were left standing in the wreckage. Charles was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. "Eleanor, I had no idea," he said, shaking his head. "I am so sorry. I never should have doubted you when you talked about them." I simply nodded, too weary for recriminations. I turned to my granddaughter, my brave, brilliant Simone, and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You were so brave," I whispered into her hair. "You were the bravest person in this whole house today. I am so proud of you." Later that evening, we sat on the back porch, the tainted celebration behind us. "So," Charles asked quietly, "the cruise? Do we still go?" It was a valid question. The thought of celebrating, of pretending to be on a joyous vacation after such a profound betrayal felt impossible. But the alternative, to stay home, to allow their poison to succeed in its goal of ruining our trip, felt like a surrender. "Yes," I said, my voice firm with a newfound resolve. We go, and we enjoy the sunshine. We enjoy the sea. We enjoy each other. We will not let them take one more thing from us." And so, the next morning, we went. The cruise was not the carefree, celebratory trip we had planned for years. There was an empty, hollow space where my mother and sister should have been, a ghost of the family I had always wished for, but never truly had. But as the ship pulled away from the shore, and the three of us stood on the deck, watching the city skyline disappear, I felt a strange sense of peace. We were a smaller family now, a tighter, more honest unit, forged in the fires of a terrible betrayal. The vacation had become something new, not a celebration of the past, but the first quiet, healing chapter of our future. The cruise was a study in quiet healing. The turquoise water and the vast, endless sky provided a serene backdrop against which the three of us began to recalibrate our lives, to find our new shape as a smaller, more tightly knit family. We snorkeled in the clear waters of St. Thomas. We walked the colorful, cobbled streets of San Juan, but mostly we talked. Charles and I had long, searching conversations, unearthing and examining the decades of dysfunction we had politely ignored for the sake of a fragile peace. He apologized with a deep and genuine remorse for his blindness, for not seeing the true depth of the toxicity I had been navigating for years. He had seen their behavior as an annoyance. He now understood it was a cancer. And Simone, my brave granddaughter, blossomed in the space left by the absence of her great-aunt's resentment and her great-grandmother's manipulative love. She was free to be a child, and the quiet relief in her was a joy to behold. We returned home not just with souvenirs and tans, but with a new, unspoken pact between us. Our peace was now a fortress, and we were its sworn protectors. The 9 months that followed were some of the most tranquil of my adult life. The legal proceedings against my mother and sister concluded not with a dramatic trial, but with a quiet, undignified plea deal. Faced with the evidence of the tainted cake and Simone's unshakable testimony, they pled guilty to lesser charges. Mama Rose, due to her advanced age, received a stern lecture from the judge and a lengthy period of probation. Darlene was given probation and a court-mandated course of anger management therapy. And I, at my lawyer's insistence, was granted a 1-year restraining order. It was a legal formality, but it felt like a gift, a court-sanctioned permission slip to have the peace I so desperately craved. The silence from their side of the family was absolute. I no longer had to brace myself before answering the phone. My Sunday afternoons were my own, filled with gardening and reading, not with navigating a minefield of passive aggression and emotional blackmail. The quiet in my home was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a presence, a warm, comforting blanket of serenity. I had not realized how much of my energy for my entire life had been dedicated to managing them, to placating their needs, to absorbing their bitterness. Without that constant drain, I felt lighter, younger, freer. Then, one Saturday morning, 9 months to the day after my disastrous birthday party, the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there they were. My mother and my sister standing on my porch, a picture of forced, penitent humility. Mama Rose was holding a large, foil-covered casserole dish, the universal suburban symbol of a peace offering. "Eleanor, darling," she began, her voice soft and trembling, a masterful performance of a frail, remorseful old woman. "It has been long enough. We've all had time to think. We've all made our mistakes. But family is about forgiveness, isn't it? I made your favorite tuna casserole." "We miss you, Eleanor," Darlene added, her eyes downcast. "We miss the family. We just want things to go back to the way they were." And there it was, the one sentence that revealed the absolute hollowness of their apology. Go back to the way they were. They had learned nothing. They didn't want a new, healthier relationship built on respect and boundaries. They wanted the old dynamic back. They wanted the comfort of my home, the convenience of my support, and the familiar punching bag of my quiet strength. They had not come to apologize for the crime. They had come because their probation was ending, and they were tired of the consequences. I looked at them, at my 85-year-old mother, The woman who had been willing to poison her own daughter and grandchild over a vacation. And my 60-year-old sister, a woman so consumed by her own bitterness, she could not see the world clearly. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, just a quiet, sad, and unshakable finality. The part of my heart that had ached for them, that had yearned for their love and approval for 62 years, was finally, blessedly, silent. I reached out and took the casserole dish from my mother's hands. It was still warm. "Thank you for the casserole, Mama," I said, my voice gentle but distant. Then I looked them both in the eye, one last time. "I wish you both well. I truly do. But this door is now closed. Goodbye." Before they could protest, before they could launch into another performance of manufactured grief, I slowly and deliberately closed the front door, shutting them out not with a slam of anger, but with the quiet, final click of the lock. I walked directly from the front door through my peaceful, silent house to the kitchen. I did not pause. I did not hesitate. I lifted the lid of the kitchen trash can, and with a single fluid motion, I scraped the entire untouched tuna casserole into the bin. The soft, messy thud it made as it landed was the punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very painful chapter of my life. At 62, you learn to recognize the things that cannot be fixed. You learn that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but that reconciliation requires a change that some people are simply incapable of making. And you learn, finally, that your own peace of mind is a treasure far more valuable than the exhausting, lifelong pretense that a toxic family is anything other than what it is.